Today's video is brought to you by the brand new Red Magic 6 series of smartphones. The Red Magic 6 is quite honestly a phone designed for people who want to game on the go. Basically everything is designed for that purpose. It has a mobile industry first display with a 165Hz refresh rate, which will adapt depending on the app you're using for a more comfortable experience. It has, and this is probably the feature that stood out most to me, multi-dimensional cooling, including an internal fan, which I've never seen in a smartphone before, and it's powered by the state-of-the-art Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 chip. Additionally, the Red Magic has a lot of other cool features that make it a great gaming phone, including physical triggers, which I find really nice, plus other features you'd expect in a high-definition smartphone like fast charging and a 64-megapixel main camera. Right now, you can check out the Red Magic 6 by visiting the link in my description. Thank you again to Red Magic for sponsoring today's video. Now, on with the content. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder Hello and welcome to another Halo video, and today I am finally getting around to doing something I've been meaning to do for a while. I am taking one of my least favorite ships in the Halo universe down a peg, and we are talking about the ugly armored metapod itself, the Mantle's approach. Now, the Mantle's approach I hate, not only because it's an ugly ship, but because it's emblematic of basically all of 343's problems and mistakes when dealing with the Forerunners up until at least Halo Infinite. If you look at the Mantle's approach, it has no visual similarity or connection to prior Forerunner designs, and some people argue that that's because, it's from a different Forerunner cast or whatever else, but that doesn't explain the rest of the art changes in Halo 4. And instead of, going with angular and simplistic styles, it goes for overly complex, very generic, lots of floaty bits and colors. It just is really ugly. I do like the flying section though, so no hate on the level itself, at least the first part. That being said, the Mantle's approach also adopts the common sci-fi mistake, one we also see in Star Wars, of making things ludicrously large to signify the fact that they're supposedly more powerful. The Mantle's approach, according to official Halo lore, is 370 kilometers tall and 140 kilometers long. That means that the Mantle's approach is 3 times taller than the Death Star. It's about 5 times longer than the Covenant supercarrier you blow up in Halo Reach, and is about 3/4 the size of High Charity, the Covenant Holy City, which itself is basically a space station. The Mantle's approach, of course, has this massive size while still being able to move, because it's not quite a space station or a capital ship, it's a battle station, a mobile fortress. A ship about half the size of Starkiller Base that can still, kick ass on the move. The problem is, the Mantle's approach just isn't that large. It's just not, at least if you play the game. Now, you can argue that, a game can only, display so much of the quote-unquote true lore, and that there are always limitations to technology, but the Mantle's approach is really a game primary bit of lore, so it just should be consistent. I also just don't accept this response from my friend Chris on Twitter, who says gameplay scale should be weird and is non-canon. The sizes given in lore is what the actual size would be. Well, no, not really. There is no actual size. It's all made up. For me, I think there's one size that makes sense within all of the context that's given, and there's one size that just doesn't. At least that's my approach. Of course, everyone is free to have their own opinion, but let's look at some of the quote-unquote evidence. And again, absolutely no shade to my friend Chris. He just has a different approach than I do, and of course, he's staff over at Halopedia, so a very knowledgeable guy when it comes to Halo lore. And he also points out that the forward unto dawn in Halo 4 is just legitimately insanely overkill when it comes to size, like probably off by 2 orders of magnitude. Anyway, let's talk about a few scenes, and the first really good shot we get of the Mantle's approach is when it assimilates or sucks up the Didact's cryptum. The cryptum seems to be, I'd say, a couple hundred meters, and we can see that obviously it's not large compared to the Mantle's approach, but we're also not dealing with something that's 100 kilometers in diameter. Then we move on and we actually get lots of other good comparison shots with the Mantle's approach next to various Covenant vessels, including Phantoms and the significantly larger Liches. Lich? I don't know. According to the Essential Visual Guide, a Covenant Lich is about 100 meters long, which is a bit longer than I would have guessed, just based on that level where you go inside of one. Nonetheless, again, we see them in formation around the Mantle's approach. Just to give a comparison, this would be like something longer, wider, and 3 times taller than the Death Star 1 and a CR-90 Corvette, although Star Wars certainly isn't always great with size itself. If you guys are interested, because movies can't always be accurate, I did actually model the Death Star with some Star Destroyers in comparison for one of my prior size comparison videos, and you can see that those Death Stars are about the size of some of the Covenant vessels we see around the Mantle's approach, indicating that, yeah, we're off by about an order of magnitude when it comes to length and height. And it's not just that you can see them in close-up shots, but even when the Mantle's approach is leaving Requiem, you can see the ships in formation around it. Anyway, the game actually gives us a fairly good way to loosely guesstimate the size of the Mantle's approach. There's one scene where you go and take out some of the point defense cannons on the Mantle's approach, and the game is actually nice enough to give us a distance marker. So the distance across this little area is, if we're being generous, about 4 kilometers long, and when we zoom out, we can get a good look at the ship with that 4-kilometer portion put into perspective. Now again, with very rough estimations, I threw this in Photoshop, I did some measurement, and I got a height of about 70 kilometers. I got 66, but there's a lot of room for error here, and even if we, I think, round up to 100, that's still much closer to proper scale. And if we change that scale a little bit, that also affects the width and the length, bringing it down to a few dozen kilometers, so comparable in size maybe to a CSO class supercarrier, which when I play the scene feels a lot closer to what the ship would actually be like. I mean, look at this shot of the Mantle's approach over Africa. I think my new measurements definitely fit a lot closer with what that shot presents and just generally with what the game presents. That being said, scale is definitely very weird. It's hard to imagine these gigantic sizes, so think about something that's 50 to 100 to 300 kilometers long. 300 kilometers, for example, is about the distance from Boston to Manhattan. Even London to Paris is under 370 kilometers. So yeah, the length doesn't make sense. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Hopefully I've convinced you guys. I know some people will just never be taken over to my position, or they'll be of the opinion that, well, game doesn't necessarily reflect the quote-unquote true lore. Again, I've given my reasons why I don't really think that makes sense, but it's fine. I'm also not a big fan of the mission. Like, I like the gameplay, but just generally I don't think it makes sense. At least I like the gameplay until you actually get inside. Then it becomes miserable. I just did the whole thing on Legendary earlier this month. I think it tries to force a little bit too much Chief into that kind of consistent role of having to go in and do the thing that nobody else can. The entire UNSC home fleet, including the Supermac platforms, not being able to burst through the hull or even slow down the Mantle's approach, yet the UNSC Infinity can after you clear out the point defense cannons for some reason, even though it's using a long-range MAC cannon. I don't know. Then it can apparently be blown up from inside with a Havoc nuke. But that's all I've got for today, and of course this is far from the only example of things being weirdly sized in science fiction, and I mean, there is one bit of evidence pointing towards the Mantle's approach actually being this length, and I'm gonna guess that this is how they actually got their measurement. When it leaves Requiem, because the planet is slightly curved, maybe that's how they got the size of the ship, but there are issues with that. I mean, that's how we got the ridiculously large size for the Death Star 2, and just generally, I don't know, often if you're gonna be off by that much, it's probably better to just not give an official size. Like, there have been many issues with Star Wars, with the Home 1, the Super Star Destroyer. Of course, we get that weird bit in Halo CE where the final Warthog run is significantly longer than the length of the ship itself. But that's all I've got for today. Until next time, guys, have a good one, be safe, and as always, may the Force be with you.